I'm an assistant professor in medicine here at McMaster. I teach in both the Health Leadership Academy and the iBiomed program. I teach design thinking, strategic foresight, leadership, creativity. And I've had just a real pleasure of getting to work across sort of some of the disciplinary boundaries that we have at the university with Nicole from the museum. Nicole, you want to?
Sure. Thank you, Sean. So I am the Senior Education Officer at the McMaster Museum of Art. I have a degree from OCAD in Strategic Foresight and Innovation. At the museum, my job is to work with faculty members to co-design learning experiences with visual art, people like Sean. I've had the pleasure to work with Sean in his class in the past a couple of times to develop and create artifacts and experiences from the future. Sean, thank you for having me here today.
Awesome. So just briefly, I mean, the Health Leadership Academy is a joint venture between the Faculty of Health Sciences and the DeGroote School of Business. We offer a range of educational programs and some research that are all about advancing the development of emerging leaders and innovation in healthcare landscape across Canada and beyond. Nicole, the museum, tell us a little bit about the museum.
It's quite the place. So the museum actually houses the university's art collection, which is over and above 6,000 works of art, which is fantastic. We're a public art gallery. And we sit on, and we'd like to acknowledge the traditional territories of the Mississauga and Haudenosaunee nations. And the museum educates and engages and inspires through an awareness of the interconnectivity of the past, present, and future. And while I have the mic, I'm going to introduce my colleague, Kate Hand. She's going to help moderate too. So she'll let us know if there's any questions. So feel free to throw anything on the chat. Thanks for being here, Kate.
Great, thanks. And we also have folks here from the Health Leadership Academy, Amanda Casalayo, Joanna Williams, and Laura Smith. They help run some of all the programs really that are part of the Health Leadership Academy, and particularly Shift, which is what our today's workshop is connected to. So if you've got questions for the programs, they're here on the call as well. And I mean, one other piece here is that we're bringing to you today is Nicole and I have initiated a very new initiative called the McMaster Futures Collective. We are interested in bringing futures and foresight to McMaster to really think about how we can reimagine health, education, and research through the lens of and with the tools of futures and foresight. And Nicole, I think you just popped that link in the chat. If you're interested in joining our email list, we're just starting to get going, but let us just pop your name and email there, and we'll get back to you at some point. More on that later. Okay, so where does this conversation begin today? You've come out of interest in design thinking and strategic foresight in health. And so let me sort of set some context for the work that we do in the Health Leadership Academy and what we're going to do today. And really some of our story begins with some research that the HLA did a couple of years back. We spent over a year looking at what are the trends, drivers, and signals of change that we really need to think about in terms of their impact on the healthcare landscape. And what do we need to do as leaders to prepare for the future? But the thing is, we really emphasize the plural futures. And in the report, we began to sort of explore what are some of the alternatives, what are the different pathways that as we think 5, 10 years out from now, what are some of the directions that healthcare might take? And some of those stories, if you will, are utopian, some are dystopian, and some are in between, as we know that we're currently living in a very challenging time. And so part of the work that we started to do then has become really helpful for us to really now think about in our work as leaders, right? No matter where you are, right? As a student, as a clinician, as a researcher, we're all doing work that's impacting the healthcare landscape in some way. And so the question we sort of wanted to start asking in our work is how do we even imagine different futures? How do we imagine something different from today? Often the expectation that things are going to be much the same, but we know that there is change, there is disruption. Right. So there's one question that we want to hold in this. How do we even allow ourselves to do that? How do we give ourselves the permission to do that, the mindset to do that? We also started asking, how do we think about the future in ways that are not, abstract, or not just different from, or sorry, not just sort of the same as today? How do we have diversity and depth in the ways that we think about the future? And often that's about for who. Whose futures are we talking about? The other challenge as we're going to explore today in doing this work is how do we make our ideas about the future concrete, something that we can engage with and tangibly sort of use to inspire how we think about where we want to go and how we get there. And so we're going to hold some of these questions in our work together today. And what we've been doing is bringing these questions into various programs that we have around leadership development, our Emerging Leaders program, right, for new emerging leaders, Pathfinder, right, bringing in design, foresight, and other things into thinking about your career journey, and then Shift, which is a new program about bringing design thinking and strategic foresight into healthcare and healthcare leadership. And so we're going to speak a bit today about the work that we do in Shift. We're going to be doing in Shift around how do we begin to reimagine a different kind of healthcare, a different kind of society that's healthier, and how do we move towards that? One of the projects that we're going to be working on this spring, if you're interested in signing up for the program, is looking at the future of aging. Aging in place. And I mean, it's just building off a conversation we're having right now across the nation about long-term care, about aging. And so what can we do in Shift to begin to come up with new ideas about how we address this? So what are you going to do? What are we going to do today? Well, first is we're going to talk about we're going to engage in a design and futures mindset. The mindset is sort of a thing that helps us think about the challenges that we come up against, how we think. And you're also going to sort of learn some methods, right? So we're going to give you a couple things to use today. Some may work for you in your work, so just keep an eye out for what those are. Our plan is we're going to do a little activity and a short talk on foresight, experiential futures, and then we're going to have an activity. We're going to put you folks to work. The stuff needs to be hands-on, so we're going to get you into an activity around creating some future scenarios that are relevant to healthcare, and then we'll debrief. And so how are you going to learn today? Well, we're going to give you some time to reflect on a few things, and we're going to use the chat. Nicole and I are going to speak a bit, and then you're going to work in a group, and we're going to actually send you to the year 2025. And then come back and bring some stuff back from the near future. So here's our starting activity called Cast Your Imagination. So we're going to consider. So let me ask this. Imagine that you're in 2050, right? 2050. Geez, that's 29 years out from now. Am I getting that right? And so my question is, do you think the world as a whole, right, is going to be, better or worse than we live in? And that's better as defined by you, right? Or do you imagine it as being worse? And so that's one dimension. And so as you think about that, we're also going to ask you to think about your agency, right? That is, what's your capacity to influence a bigger picture, right? However you think about that. Do you feel like you have the confidence in being able to affect change, or are you doubtful or skeptical? And so those are the two questions. And the way that this comes from the Pollock game. And these are the 4 dimensions, right? Things are good and getting better. right? We can't do anything about it, but why worry? It's okay. Where things are getting better and good, right? And we can actually even do something about it. Things are getting worse, the world is going to hell, and there's nothing we can do about it, right? Or things are getting really bad, but we can do something about it. So these are the 4 dimensions. Oh, and I don't know why it's not showing up right now. I've added, let's see if we can add this in here. We're going to ask you to, let's see if I can get this to work here. So we're going to ask you to pick a quadrant, right? So you've got quadrant, you got your upper right and your upper left and your lower right and your lower left. So in the chat, either it's going to be, sorry, it's going to be either upper left, right? Or upper right, right? Or lower left or lower right. So pick one of those 4 and pop it in the chat.
Sean,
let
if
us
you
know.
want,
Yeah.
sorry, I actually created a quick Google form poll for this if you want. Kate, can you pop that in the chat for us, please? We had Zoom problems earlier today. We used
Polling
to
was not working for us.
it wasn't
today.
working for us.
Ah,
Create a
great.
Google form, and I've got access to that, so I can say. So hopefully everybody can link onto that.
There you go. There's a Google form there in the chat.
Responses are coming in. Got a lot of people thinking some interesting things.
Yeah, we got enough response there to work
We've
with.
got 28 people so far. Let's give it just a couple seconds.
Yeah. Okay. Again, I mean, are things going to be better or worse? And do you feel like you have any agency in making an impact, changing that future?
Okay, 33. Maybe we'll get a couple more. Okay, so it looks like most people fit into the lower right. And then coming in a hot second, the upper right.
Okay.
Okay, and then we've got a few people under the lower left. Okay, so I can tell you what that's all about. Let me just find everyone here. We are in Zoom again. Okay, so with most people coming in on the lower right, we're going to talk about what that means, what we feel it means ourselves, and then how the rest of us might see you. So please don't take offense to this. It's all just
this is part of how the game was constructed.
So most of us see ourselves as realistic or even stoic. So we think that lower right, we think that things are getting worse. The world is in fact going to hell, but we can act to make things better. So others might see you actually as fighters, battlers, martyrs, or lost causes. And then coming in next, I believe it was lower left. So things are getting worse. The world is going to hell, and there is nothing we can do about it. Oh my, very pessimistic. So, so this quadrant, you see yourselves as free and easy, que sera, sera. But the rest of us might see you as losers, victims, and lazy. And the next popular one was the upper right, which I think is not actually correct. That's okay. I think I have this mixed up. So you may see yourselves as powerful or having agency because you think things are going to get better and we can act to make things better. But others might see you as deluded, unrealistic, and potentially oppressors. So the last one that's left that we didn't have any uptake on is that things are good, getting better, and we can't do anything about it anyway, so why worry? It's okay. So this, people who fall into this quadrant, should you ever come across one of these people, they might see themselves as service-oriented, and the rest of us, though, might see them as passive idealists and just plain lucky.
Yeah. Yeah, and thanks, Nicole. And so usually we play this game in a room and people can move to the different quadrants, right? And we can really have a conversation kind of across those perspectives, because here's the piece about this is, as we think about the future, we need to confront that there are different perspectives and expectations and hopes about what the future is going to be. And so we ask in this conversation, whose perspectives are here and present? And if we're really interested, and this is kind of our perspective on this work, is if we're really interested in creating possibilities and futures that bring everyone forward, then we need to begin with what our sort of hopes and expectations are, right? And what are our judgments, right? And biases and expectations. And yeah, I mean, can we bring in and honor and learn from those perspectives, especially from those that might think everything is okay, that we might need to move into action, right? Because if things are not okay, right? And so we do this as a way of beginning to think about the future in terms of possibilities. And if anybody's involved in futures work, you'll really know this cone very well. And this is the possibility cone by Dunn and Raby. And Nicole, did you want to talk about the cone?
The good old cone of possibility.
You spent a lot of time with the cone.
I spent a lot of time with the cone. I think Julia too, you will also spend some time with the cone. But this is great. This is actually a great illustration. One of my classmates in the program actually got a tattoo of the cone of possibilities. So it was very nice.
Wow.
But it's a good illustration to think about this game we just played. We all have different expectations of the future, utopian, dystopian, and everything in between. And some of the expectations are based in evidence and data. Some just come from our upbringing, our different personal experiences, the various cultures we're part of, and things like that. And we argue that if we're able to design inclusive futures, different futures should in fact emerge while we're designing and thinking about this, because we are not all the same. We're all very different people. So notice in the middle, the green part, the preferable future, which intersects the probable futures and the plausible futures. But there's always a question here that we want you all to think about. What constitutes a better future or better futures, and for whom?
And the piece now that, I mean, thinking about design and foresight as disciplines that help us think about, what we make, how we make, for whom, and how we create, new worlds and new possibilities, is that this work of thinking about the future is not just about the imagination. It's important, but it's also about how, data and histories and trends in the current moment shape our current realities, right? And where things might go, right? So we're used to, talking about probabilities, right? We talk about how evidence shapes that. And really the work of futures and foresight is a field that's been around for over 50 years. That is my screen still showing here? Yeah, great. That addresses how do we think more effectively about what might plausibly happen in the future, right? And so asking us to imagine, more than just one future possibility. And some of the origins of this work are actually part of the US military in scenario planning, but really moved well beyond that to become an interdisciplinary field, has a wide range of journals, covers sort of every field out there. And there's an academic side to this work that looks at different ways of constructing the future, and then there's an applied side. And so we're going to spend some time on the applied side today, working with some of the mindsets that help us put, foresight into practice in a way that we can really
give this to you? It doesn't have the protective wrapping on it.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, no protective wrapping.
That's the future.
The future. Okay, Nicole, you want to take us through the mindsets here?
Sure, let's go through the mindsets. Okay, so we're going to get you into the mindset to even begin about thinking about futures. I think we're already kind of there with that game. It was pretty good. But there's three things we want to point out here to sort of get you there and get you thinking, and things that you have to consider. So we insist we have to deeply know the past and the present. Understanding the present ties into knowing the past, of course, and our diverse histories. What problems and possibilities exist here right now in our time? And this, of course, if we talk about the future's cone, we're at the very tip of the future's cone in the present. So we ask you also to be open and to be curious about possibilities and perspectives. Experiencing and envisioning alternative futures requires an openness and a curiosity. And we also act and create in order to sense the emerging future. So envisioning futures, being able to see what might happen, is where they are made real. So we have to see these stories, we have to see scenarios come to life. That's important to us as human beings. So to get there, we're going to frame this current COVID-19 pandemic, because it's kind of an opportunity to look at something that perhaps a lot of us didn't expect coming, to sort of look at how it can shape a future.
Great, thanks, Nicole. So last May, when we ran this workshop, this shot here is from Public Health Agency of Canada, and we're all familiar with these curves now, right? And as scientists, I mean, we have scenario modeling and forecasting as part of our toolkit, right? So one way of thinking about the futures is we do this kind of work, right? And I mean, there's different modeling to show different impacts, right? And these talk about probable and preferable futures, right? Depending on the measures that we enacted. But as much as we need to make decisions, based on evidence and probabilities, which is really important, what the modeling of forecasts do is it can sometimes, if we stay within that, it can blind us to only to the highly probable rather than a wider range of possibilities. And so what Foresight does is it actually invites us to open our aperture wider than we might normally do. Right, so this is sort of the normal range we're used to sort of thinking, and future sort of now expands this to think about other possibilities. One way of doing that is to think about the future and new things that might be in the future, new worlds, if you will. We're going to introduce a little bit of the work today of Leah Zaidi, who helps us think about futures in very tangible ways. And she uses this notion of world building or world making, right? A world is, could be our home, but thinking on a larger scale, world sort of encompasses the social, the economic, the technological, political, and so on. And so a world also contains artifacts. And so part of her work is constructing scenarios and artifacts of things that don't exist yet, but looking at where things might go based off of today, begin to create artifacts that get us to reflect back. So one of the things that she did was create a series of job ads or job descriptions from the future. We currently don't have any reality rehabilitators, but as we sort of think about our immersion in the virtual, in that what's going on there, does this get us to think about, is there a need for something in this area, right? That is now emerging as a result of us sort of spending a lot of time in virtual worlds. And her work's great. And so what she has us do is to think about, in order to create new worlds, is to actually think about a range of dimensions that constitute the construction of a world, right? So she has 7 pieces in her model. Some use 5. She includes the artistic and philosophical in this. It really has dimensions to think about how do you kind of construct a world. And we're actually going to play with this today. So the other piece is to think about, in creating worlds and imagining new worlds, is think about what are the drivers of change and trends that we need to think about. And there are lots. Climate change is the top of the list right now. And there are many others, right? Globalization, technology, urbanization. These are all things that shape our world. But something that's really interesting about futures is it goes beyond this to look at things that are described as weak signals or wildcards or unexpected events that we might not sort of really see right now, but can have tremendous impact. And one of the best examples of this from a technology point of view is to think about the iPhone. And hello. the iPhone has had a huge impact on how we're handling this pandemic. And I don't mean just the iPhone. I mean, smartphones, the technology to be able to communicate. And this is something that, I mean, if anybody here is a Star Trek fan, you go back to watching, the first Star Trek and then the Next Generation. I mean, the ideas for some of this technology were there, but now they're made real, right? So to think, there are developments in various areas like technology that can have tremendous impact on our life, on our world. But there's also another side to the narrative, right? As much as there's been changes in technology that have shaped how we're experiencing and handling the pandemic, there's also another narrative. Politically, socially, issues around mistrust of government, of science, of misinformation, of conspiracy theories have all played a role in the discourse about the pandemic. And so there's a question also about, without these social platforms, without the technology that we've come to sort of rely on to share information, there's also now a conversation about divisions and populist politics and echo chambers and how are we really getting information to understand our world. So very challenging. And so we return again to this model, right? These models. And I remember when I first saw this, I had really no idea what that would actually look like for there to be lockdown. I had never experienced it. I don't know many of us have, or what a pandemic out of control would look like. So there's one more piece here, and then we're going to put you to work, is to think about the future as needing to be somehow made experiential, embodied, visual, something that we can tangibly sort of wrap our minds, hearts, and bodies around to get us to feel what a reality might be like, and how we might even begin to work towards it, or to take a different direction. Images are very powerful in shaping our sense of new realities. This came right in sort of the first lockdown. If anybody's taken the highway commuting into downtown Toronto during rush hour, you'll know that this is starkly different. And when I first saw this, I mean, my gut reaction was the apocalypse is here, right? Very emotional. And even more so, many people were struck in New York City and the first lockdown, first wave of the pandemic through New York, hospitals running out of space, and people beginning to see the images of this new future emerging and feeling a range of emotions in response to it. And the role of course, of the media, of photographers in bringing those stories to us, right? So the visceral, the sensory, right, as being really important. So the work of experiential futures we're going to do is sort of talk about the design of new futures, right? And about how understanding situations in an embodied way can help us catalyze insight and change. So we need to talk just a little bit about the arts here.
Yeah, because we cannot achieve what we cannot imagine, for sure. So the arts, of course, we're enriched with these gifts of artists, directors, writers, giving us these futures that help we can see them. We see them in literature, film, and visual art. And we've got a slide of suggested media. We won't talk about these individually because I think a lot of them are probably quite familiar to everyone. Good, bad, funny, horrible, horrifying, dystopian, utopian, the whole gamut. But these help us to see what's real. In terms of visual art, the next two slides I'm going to show you are images from Anishinaabe artist Lisa Jackson's 2018 VR work called Bidabon, first light. Bidabon means daybreak, or of course, first light, which is really nice. But this is rooted in indigenous futurism. Bidabon asks users to think about their place in history and their role in a possible future. Here is in Toronto. We just saw the image of the empty Gardiner Expressway in Toronto. This is Canada's largest city. And this time reclaimed by nature. And then the second slide for this is like a subway station. Some of you may be very, very familiar with this. But imagine being here when it is almost a natural space being taken back as it was once before. Another work, this is called Plastic Century, and it's by futurist Stuart Candy and Jake Dunnigan, artist Sarah Kornfeld, and oceanographer Dr. Wallace J. Nichols. So the image isn't really that great, but if you look at the 4 water coolers, this is a visualization of the plastic pollution in oceans and the problem of this. It captures the history, the present, and the plausible future of plastic in oceans. Just imagine now, this is the emotional catch, is you have to drink the water that's in all of these. And so in 1910, there's like one little piece of plastic. 1960s, there's a little bit more. 2010, swimming in plastic. And then here, this slide from 2030, it's almost opaque with plastic. Imagine trying to drink this. So we can see these futures kind of made real, and it's a little bit more effective when we can see it happen.
Okay. So we're going to send you to 2025. We're going to get you to help assemble some of these things and make some sense of this, but also disorient a little bit, not too much. What we're going to do is we're going to send you into a breakout room with 3 other folks. And what we're going to ask you to do is to introduce yourselves to each other, say hello to your fellow humans. And we are going to get you to consider a future scenario. There's one of 4 that we're going to have you to consider. And you see when you're going to get to the link that we're going to share with you, is you're going to see some descriptors for a particular scenario in 2025. And so what your job is going to be to look at some of those descriptors, and you're going to create a newspaper headline from 2025. Okay. Your goal is going to be to create a newspaper headline from 2025. And this is how we're going to do it. Let's see here.
Okay.
All right.
Tara can't be included in a group. That's okay.
So what we're going to do is everybody's going to be sent a link, and we're going to show you how to do this shortly, to a program called Miro, and it's a collaborative visual platform. And you're gonna see that you're gonna be given a room here. And again, your job is going to be to create a newspaper headline that captures what the future looks like in 2025. And you're going to see some information here. You're going to spend some time reading some descriptors about the future, right? This feature is called Detour Back. It's really kind of about going back to the old normal, right? As quickly as possible. And you're going to see there some information about what that world might look like politically, economically, philosophically. And so you're going to take some time to read some of these descriptors, and to keep it simple, is each of you is just going to pick one thing from the description of this future that you find really interesting in some way, right? One of the things it just pops out to me is, spiritual retreats, right? Meaning of life classes increase, right? Oh, what's that about? Okay, right, as a response. So each person, you're going to spend a little bit of time just chatting with each other about the one idea from this future that you find interesting. Right? You're going to share your ideas with each other. And your last task is going to be to create a newspaper headline from the future, right? So you'll edit the you'll edit the newspaper title, and you'll put in, this might be, Toronto Star, right? And you'll pick a date for 2025, and you'll come up with a headline, right? And headlines are usually quite short. And if you have time and you want to add in some images and other story headlines, go ahead. Right. Okay, welcome back, folks.
Uh-oh.
Okay. All right. I hope you had an enjoyable time making sense of a bunch of dots. We gave you some dots, and we how'd you do the thinking, making some connections. So welcome back. We'd like to hear as we come back what your headlines were. So if you can, in the chat, if you could title what scenario you had, right? So, scenario 1, 2, 3, or 4. And what was your headline, right? Or what was an idea that really captured you in the conversation? So share with us some of your headlines. Love to hear.
If you want to add too, maybe if people can, because my group did this, but we came up with an actual newspaper. Not came up with it, but we decided what newspaper our headline would be published in.
Great. That's even more interesting to add in for context, right? Different newspapers, different perspectives.
Oh my goodness. Do you want me to start reading some of these out, or hang on a minute?
Great.
Okay. Oh, Samim, you're welcome.
Okay, so we've got a scenario 1 here, a detour back from Ohud. Hundreds gather in outdoor Shakespearean film festivals. Winds roar 200 kilometers an hour in southern Ontario. Okay. Yeah, lots going on there. Okay, Julia, scenario 3: flooded Thames forces Londoners into isolated micro communities.
Oh.
Okay, so that's a vicious circle. We've got some climate change stuff going on there. And a micro community. I mean, it's a new term. I haven't heard that very much.
I can put the one up from my group. Okay. So
as you post those in the chat, we're also sort of open, open the mic up if you want to just briefly share a newspaper and a headline that your team came up with. If anybody feel free to unmute themselves, raise their hand, and let us know scenario you had, what future you had.
So I posted scenario 1, the hundreds gather in the outdoor film festival.
Yeah,
and we were in the detour back group. And the one kind of what stood out to me is the idea of us going back to collective gatherings and yearning for that sense of community and arts. And, personally, I've been itching to just go to a wedding. You start to miss those group activities. And then one of my partners in the group pointed out climate change and how we're kind of on a downward trend and things aren't getting better anytime soon. So this headline shows the desperation of people to, go on with their social life as our environment falls apart.
Okay, yeah, it paints a really mixed picture of emotion, right? That yearning, right? That bonding, and now the backdrop to it all being one that's not that's very challenging. Great, thanks, Ovid. We got some more coming in here. We got let's see here, Toronto Sun, center of the slumverse, poor take over downtown empty office buildings as housing becomes scarce. Okay, wow.
Well, that one. Kindergartners relearn how to touch. Hugs allowed in school again. Can you imagine? Keep calm, carry on. Headline: reuse needles. A point to the future. You guys, amazing. Okay, we have a keep calm, carry on. The newspaper is called the Canadian Dispatch. Custom designed cows, 90% claimed. Submit application now.
So feel free to just put a few more of those in, and just in the interest of time, we want to do a couple of things to help tie this together a little bit. And so some of this work relates back to, you might be able to see which scenario you were in, but Jim Datter, who really sort of helped develop some of this work, talked about 4 different kind of narrative arcs of futures. And you could probably see scenario 1, 2, 3, and 4 as being related in there. And that there are different storylines that can help us construct different images of the future. And so anybody who's interested in understanding a little bit more about the concepts and tools for future building and world building will find this work sort of really, really interesting. So we don't really have much time to unpack that, except to kind of spend a little bit of time now reflecting as a way of tying some things together. So what we're going to do is, in a little bit of time that we have left, actually ask you to reflect on your own for a little bit. So we spent time today asking you to think about the expectations you have in the future and this notion of multiple futures. And then we gave you 4 scenarios with different descriptors, future descriptors, political, etc. And then we had you design an artifact, a newspaper article that made that future tangible. So here's a question. I'll give you a few minutes for this. Is where in healthcare do you see the greatest need to use some of this way of thinking, some of these tools that we've used today? Wherever you sit, from wherever perspective you have, from whatever your work is, bring it back to that. Right. So where in your relationship to healthcare, okay, might there be a need to use some of these tools or these mindsets? So we'll give you a minute, and get some responses in the chat to help us close our session today. Okay. So let us know in the chat or raise your hand for something you'd like to share. But how does some of the work that we've introduced you today, how does it relate back to healthcare and what we mean to be doing in healthcare today? Okay, so coming in here, Foresight, looking at more deadly or pandemics in the future. So thinking about things even being worse. How do we prepare for that? Yeah, how do we deal with racism in medicine? Right? Inequity, inclusion, power, right? Part of our future. Okay, so looking at alternative models of providers for community-based rehab therapies, flexibility to overcome wait lists, and resource or funding shortages. Yeah, and some of the stuff that we'll look at in Shift is to look at the ways in which Foresight is being used in healthcare around different business models. For example, SE Health are using futures to look at new business models that don't even exist yet. For example, Zaina Kayat, who's the future strategist, sort of asks even questions like, how would hospitals, for example, ever get into the funeral business, right? That as we look at different ways of providing services and support, how do institutions change and kind of the models that they have? having end users involved in delivery. Yeah. So this is a sort of a big conversation that we sort of need to talk about, right, around the future of healthcare. And part of the struggle in doing this work is first of all, the future doesn't exist yet, right? That it's shaped and created by the forces that are present today, but also by our choices and our imagination. And knowing that it's actually hard to imagine things being different. Some of you might have been surprised by some of the scenarios, descriptors that you had of things being different. And so a question about how do we open our aperture to see where signs of change are occurring? And then how do we imagine and visualize those futures, right? In ways that might inspire new ways of strategizing or taking action in our present reality. Yet doctor and patient relationships, right? How do those stay at the center, or how do they change in the new world? Thanks, Matthew. So this brings us to the end of our workshop. I mean, this is an experiment for us, trying to do a bunch of new stuff today. It's a little bit clunky here and there, but we pulled through. You folks did great.
Yes.
We'll have this as part of this recording available to you. We have there's a range of resources if you're interested in looking more at the world of futures and foresight. So please take a look at some of those resources. Take a screenshot of that if you want. There it is in the chat. And so we'd also like to hear from you about this workshop today. And so we've got a Google form there. I think the date's probably wrong on it. I think it might say March 4th or something. It's from the past. So don't worry about, yeah, it's an artifact of the past. So please let us know about what you thought about today's workshop. We'd really love to hear from you. And we'd love to hear more from you. And a reminder, we'll put the link back in the chat. There is the Futures Collective. And we'll also provide, again, just on our way out, information about our upcoming leadership programs with the Health Leadership Academy. If you're interested in finding out more about the programs that we're offering around strategic foresight, design, and leadership, please feel free to reach out to us. So thank you, everybody, for coming. Last thing before we go, as we close, one word in the chat. What are you taking away with you, or a phrase, something? What are you taking away from today's workshop? Please just let us know in there in the chat with one word. Love to hear what you folks are taking away from today.
Nice.
Music to close our workshop out today. Thanks. Thank you very much, everybody. And I mean, I can stick around for a few minutes for a conversation if anybody wants to chat. Happy to chat at the end of our official program.